I'm Ken Johnson. I'm a Navy captain, retired, born and raised in Southern California, but now live here in Pacific Grove, Monterey County area. I spent 31 years in the Navy driving ships, commanded destroyers, had command of the communications station at Stockton up in Rough and Ready Island. And after spending 31 years in the Navy, retired and moved here to the Monterey Peninsula, where I got deeply involved with many of our maritime activities. I am the past Commander General, or President, of the Naval Order of the United States, which is the oldest maritime historical society, founded July 4th, 1890. So it appeared to be logical to come here and become a volunteer at Monterey History and Arts, and as you all know, is now called MOM. After a very gracious restructuring and focus on the area, this museum here continues to contribute to our maritime history here in Monterey. One of my other duties after retiring was to become the Director of Alumni Relations at the Naval Postgraduate School, which is just down the street. As you know, the Naval Postgraduate School is the old Del Monte Hotel, where in 1943 it was our pre-flight school training station for our pilots, which were coming into the Navy and flying both in the Atlantic and Pacific theater. One of the interests I've had here is that in 2004, when we moved here, I got deeply involved with the Monterey History and Arts with the Sloat Landing. Now, you all know Commodore Sloat arrived here, and he established this area, the California, putting our flag, our American flag here, and established the far western territories. I was very fortunate to be invited to come and join the Monterey History and Arts personnel in putting together the Sloat Landing. We do this each July 7th or around that date, which commemorates his anniversary. This has been put on each year since 1931, continuously, except for 3 years during World War II activities. Last year was another great event that we had here down on the waterfront, right down by the Customs House, which had everyone participating from our mayor all the way down. We've had the Admiral at the Postgraduate School dress up as Commodore Sloat. For the last several years, it's been a retired Navy captain who's also an instructor at the school. For the last several years, they've come ashore in a longboat, which is really impressing the people on the wharf that comes down. It's open to the public, and again this year, the first weekend in July, we'll be celebrating the anniversary. Commodore John Drake Sloat was the commanding officer or the flotilla commander of the Navy ships which were in patrolling waters off of Mexico, and then were charged and tasked by orders from Washington, D.C. to come to our peninsula here, to the Monterey area, and in fact to raise the flag here, establish this as a territory of the United States. Many of you may think that the first capital of California was at Monterey. It actually was at San Jose and then moved on up to Venetia and eventually was settled there in Sacramento. For those that have been out at Del Monte Shopping Center, that land was originally maintained to the fact that that is where the capital of California would be built. And when it was decided after many, many years, that property was sold. And now we have the Del Monte Shopping Center. Our history of the maritime community here, our history of our young sailors, our officers and crew that have traced back to the days at the Defense Language School, which came there to learn languages before going into foreign countries, on ships and ashore. In fact, I'm a graduate of the Defense Language Institute, went there in 1966, learning Vietnamese. So all of you out there, chào ông, hôm nay mình hỏi come gọi lang yang. Of course, that then allowed me to go to Vietnam in 1967 and 68 for a one-year tour. But as we see as people move around and they come here to the Naval Postgraduate School for their studies, that they in fact will find that Monterey is a place that they would always like to come back, whether it's golfing or whether it's the fine restaurants or the weathers and such like that. Now, my charming bride of 51 years plus, Judy and I, we have moved in the military every 2 years from living in the Philippines, Hawaii, Washington, Virginia, and other places that I can't really tell you all about right now, where I have been. we decided that we would come and live and make our permanent home here in the Monterey Bay area, and we're in Pacific Grove down by the waterfront. And so we can watch the small sailboats and items come in. For the new students that come here to the school, we talk to them about don't get locked up in your studies. Get out and see the sights, do things, play golf, go sailing, go and fly the airplanes which the school has for their program. If you had a chance to pick up a phone book or Google it and such like that, go down and find the number of admirals and generals and such that come here to retire because of the beautiful climate and such that we have here. When I came here in 2004, the museum is run basically as it is today on an all-volunteer basis. There are very few paid people on the staff. In fact, to be honest with you, I'm really not too sure how many are paid today, but I was one of the watchstanders, many of the watchstanders, and we would be here on watches during the day to greet and meet the people that would be here, to come and visit the museum. In fact, I don't know whether you can zoom in, but this is the official watchstander tie, which I wore today, which has the lens from the lighthouse down at Big Sur. And we would be open here every day except on Monday, and we'd be here to greet the visitors that would come. In fact, I kept driving people to sign the log and give a comment on where they came from. And if the log was available right now, I could flip through it and we would find someone here from Sweden, we'd find some here from Norway. But one of the greatest thrills that I had as a watchstander, and I'm sure if others were here, they'd probably share the same thing, is that when we have our younger generation coming from, say, Salinas, a generation that may not necessarily have a full command of the English language, but to be able to communicate with them and to be able to show them the various displays of the historical significance of the influence of the Spanish in the area really was most gratifying. One of the things that I really enjoyed being a watchstander here at the museum was the historical significance of the displays and items that we had here. When you would come into the museum on the first floor, of course you'd have the light from the lighthouse at Big Sur. That is a Fresnel lens of the first magnitude, the largest they had. That was built in France, then disassembled, brought around the Horn, and installed. From there you would move and see the model of the USS Macon. The USS Macon is really significant to this area because she flew out of Moffett, just up the coast from here, strong Navy presence up there, and she would fly. And the people that would live here in Monterey and Pacific Grove that said as she would go by, and of course every airship is called a she, just like a ship, that it would seem to be like the sky was blanketed because it would block the sun, creating the shadows. Well, the Macon went down off of Big Sur in the 30s, and 81 survived, 2 were lost. The significance about that is that the fishing boats from Massa Landing and such would go out there and they'd come back empty, all except one boat. And that boat captain would continue to bring back the greatest catches of all, and the other members would be skunked and wouldn't have a good fish load for it. Well, as it finally came out, he had discovered by chance where the Macon had gone down and the schools of fish had collided, and in fact that is where. Later on, divers went down and took video pictures of it, and in the file here in the museum, it is available now on request so you can see these pictures. Then moving over in the corner, we would have the World War II exhibit. Now, what is significant about that exhibit? As you come into the lobby of the museum right here, you'll see a ship's bell. It's a huge, large brass bell. On it, it says USS Monterey, 1943. Now, that is not when Monterey was discovered, but that is the ship's bell off of the USS Monterey, which was a CVS, a light carrier, which was built specifically for our conflict in the Pacific. And in the museum would be displays of other items, and that was financially supported by our retired community, including Admiral Tissot, Commander Spud Lammy, and a lot of names which those in the service will remember and recognize. And of course, then the Commodore Sloat display and the items that have it. We're very fortunate that in the remodeling of the museum, which is a tremendous opportunity to move forward to a new generation of families and people that are interested to have on the first floor what I would call modern art, structure and such like that, which really tweaks your imagination and you want to come back and see more of it because it's constantly changing. But for those that are more traditional, going up on the second floor, you'll have the ship's models, those that people really would live into. You have a great history shown again of the fishing community, which is so rich in this area, and you can move on into other events for it. I do want to say, being captain of a destroyer, the captain's suite, which was displayed here on the second floor, does not resemble the suite that I had on a destroyer, nor the suite that you would have on a battleship. But I would like to say that one last thing is that this weekend I'm going up to Richmond and see the USS Iowa. She is going to be towed soon down to become a ship display in the city of Long Beach. You may not realize that, but the USS Iowa is the only Navy ship that has a bathtub in it. The bathtub was installed and put in for the flag quarters. Now, why would you say, why would a ship, especially of that size, have a bathtub? Well, as history would have it to be, that was a ship that Franklin D. Roosevelt went on to Yalta for his meetings and discussions, and he never traveled without a bathtub. Now, as many as you know, right up the road here, up in Highway 1, is Fort Ord. Fort Ord was the largest Army post here, and we had cavalry training in World War I and training going into World War II until the post was closed down during the Clinton years and is now developed into more recreational housing. But there, at every post, as we would call for an Army base, there must be a way for the troops to relax and enjoy themselves at, say, over a can of beer, a case of beer. And that was the bar up there at the Stillwell Club. And the bar was very, very famous because before you went out to combat or before you shipped out, you'd get your mates together, you know, because you weren't sure when you're going to see them again. And you say, let's go over and have a can of beer. We're contacting people that had been there, had served in the war, and some have come back here to live and say, hey, what was it like? What were your stories? You know, up the Stillwell bar, which is here at in the museum upstairs, it would be the equivalent of all the Navy people that I have known when you went to Subic Bay. You went to Subic Bay and you went to the Chuck Wagon. The Chuck Wagon was the last outpost. It was an old Quonset hut that had a bar that would never be forgotten. And you would have a Sam McGill. That would be the breakfast of champions of Sam McGill. Well, they have the same thing up here from Stillwell, and I'm really excited about that. Hopefully I can be a small part of this.